Hello and welcome to Seasons of Leadership. I'm Dawn Murden, Executive Coach and former VP of Customer Success, and your host today. This is the podcast where we talk honestly about the different seasons that we go through as leaders, the shifts, the challenges, and what those phases teach us. Today I'm joined by Conrad Mepham-Stone, founder of Consoul, Royal Air Force veteran, NLP trainer and all-round champion of helping people understand their mindset and reach their full potential. We met at an event called In Focus, run by the brilliant brand photographer Hannah Martinig. So Conrad, welcome to Seasons of Leadership.
Hi Dawn, thanks for having me along.
Thank you for joining me. Those events are brilliant, aren't they? You just get to go along, meet other business owners, take some photos. How did you find that?
Yeah, I love it. I think they're so good. I've been to a couple of them now. One added bonus is that they're always pretty close to my house. So that's always a bit of a winner for me.
Brilliant. Well, it was fantastic to meet you there. And that's why I wanted to ask you to be a guest on today's podcast. So let's dive in. You spent 15 years in the Royal Air Force. What inspired you to join?
But a couple of things, really. The main factor was a big push factor from my current sort of situation and circumstance. At the time when I applied, I think I was 18, nearly 19, working in the local leisure centre as a lifeguard, living it up, having the good life. But I'd always sort of, wondered or thought or always kind of found the military career thing as quite an aspiring sort of thing to do. At the time, I was very big on sort of fitness. And if I'm honest, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder at the time as well. I kind of had it in my head, I want to go and sort of do something which proves that, I'm really good or that I'm really sort of fit and that I'm, blah, blah, blah. This was me then. It's not me now. But so that was kind of a big driver for me. There were also quite a few things kind of going on at home at the time, and in my life around the area, which I thought probably best to sort of move away from this. So yeah, I signed up, and yeah, that was sort of it. I went from there.
Was it how you expected when you went into it?
A little bit of yes and a little bit of no. I initially applied to be a personal training instructor. Right? That's not what I ended up joining as, but that's what I initially applied for because I was quite big on fitness and stuff. So I trained and got super, super fit. When I sort of arrived there, I was a lot fitter than everyone else. Like a lot fitter. So I thought that I would sort of be about where I needed to be, but I was considerably above that, which then meant that a lot of the exercise and stuff we were doing was not really pushing or challenging me. And I didn't find any of that push or a challenge throughout all of my training. In terms of how it was and how we were treated, yeah, I suppose that's exactly sort of what I was expecting. Maybe not quite so much of an emphasis on the teamwork stuff. But that was a lesson I quickly learned. Yeah, a little bit of yes and a little bit of no, I think, all in all.
And how do you think those years in the RAF sort of molded you into the kind of like leader and person that you are today?
When you're younger, unless you sort of go out, I suppose it's kind of different now because, we have sort of social media and we have access to, the big wide world, don't we? 2008, this was, you didn't have sort of social media. You didn't have access to the big wide world. You only had access to what was kind of, generally immediately around you or just what you saw on the news. So your world was kind of small, to join up and meet people from all over the country initially, and then obviously ongoing throughout your career to meet people from all over the world, hugely opens your eyes to the different ways that sort of people operate, the different things that make people tick. And more importantly, the different things that motivate people. Quite early on in my career, I was very quickly humbled, if you will, with that chip on my shoulder sort of came back to bite me a little bit, whereby I thought I was sort of, really fit and really, really fantastic and all the rest of it. And someone who I at the time saw as someone, I'll be honest, who I thought at the time was quite beneath me, was actually miles ahead in terms of fitness and strength and all the rest of it. But I wanted to join as a personal training instructor, or PTI as they're called, but there weren't any vacancies open at the time. I didn't get through the interview for it. So they said, if you want to do something physical and about fitness, then you can join the RAF regiment. So I was like, I don't know what that is, but yeah, sure, I'll do it. Turns out that the RAF regiment is a little bit like what the Marines are to the Navy, but the RAF regiment is the same to the RAF, so an infantry role. So it does require a fairly high level of fitness. Anyway, obviously, because I didn't get through for PTI, and I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, every single PTI I came across early on in my career, I kind of looked at as to say, oh, you're better than me, I'll show you, sort of thing. That was sort of my mentality and the way I thought about it. So I think it was only in the first 3 or 4 weeks of basic training, we had to do a timed 1.5 mile run. It started with you would run a 1.5 mile first at the PTI's pace, and then you would run the same route back in at best effort. And that was the time that they clocked for you. So I'll never forget, I remember there was this PTI there, and I think the best way I can think to describe him is he looked a little bit like a malnourished Boris Johnson. And I thought, there is no way this guy is fitter or better than me. I'm going to sort of make him look a bit silly in this run. So we set off for this, fastest you can 1.5 miles back. I straight out the blocks, and I was miles ahead of everyone, and I was running, and, I was like, yeah, this is good. Right? I'm going to beat all of them in, and they're going to look at him and go, oh, do you know what? He should be a PTI. That's sort of what I had in my head, right? But anyway, I'm running along, and I can hear some kind of footsteps coming up behind me. And I'm like, no way anyone's catching me. So I sort of speed up a bit, but the footsteps keep coming. And eventually just breezes up beside me is this guy. And I was like, I'm almost going flat out at this point. He's just breezed up next to me, and I'm like, no way. How has he caught me? Anyway, even more frustratingly, he just looks over towards me. He didn't even look like he was out of breath. Just looked over towards me, and he just says, it's okay. It's all right. Just relax. Just chill. And then he was gone, right? He left me in the dust. And I was kind of like, no way. And for all of my efforts, I could not catch him. Now I came in 8 minutes 12. And, for anyone that knows anything about sort of running, that is quick for 1.5 miles, very quick for 1.5 miles. He must have come in well under 8 minutes, made me look really silly. But it turns out, he was a county runner. But that was one of many moments of, people that I looked at the time and thought, no, you don't look like I think you should look like to do that role. Who then actually, turned out to be very suited to that role.
There's all kind of things rolled into that, isn't that, in terms of, how we internalize things and the judgments that we have on other people. I think especially when we're younger as well, and we may have certain ideas about what things or people are meant to be like in certain situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a very different, teenager or late teen to, the late 30s, man that I am now. So yeah, I've learned a lot.
Oh, and what did you sort of touched on it actually a little bit earlier in terms of you thought leadership was more like being the best, the fittest, the strongest. So that's what it meant, I guess, early on to you in your RAF career, or I guess your perception perhaps of leadership, when you first joined. How did that change over time?
Yeah, so it was through these kinds of, moments, throughout my career, really, of meeting people that you don't expect too much of, that actually come through and show you well above and beyond whatever you thought they were capable of. But, I didn't really know a lot at the time. I didn't think I didn't know a lot. Of course, you think you know everything when you're 18, 19, don't you? But, the more you sort of learn, the more you realize, the less you know. As I've sort of gone through my career, I have met all sorts of incredibly inspiring people for all kinds of different reasons as well. There are a few standouts. For me, one of my instructors on basic training, for instance, now he was, to me at that time, everything that I thought leaders should be. He never kind of stuttered in what he said. He never said he never said he was very crisp, clean and clear in everything he said. And it was to the point, he knew everything he needed to know, in that moment. So, to me at that time, he was the pinnacle of it. I was like, I want to be that guy. He is on the ball. He's sharp as a razor sort of thing. So, and I'll be honest, that did stick with me. And I, interestingly, have met him later on in my career, and he is still very much the same, and he's doing very, very well. So yeah, keeping sort of the core things that I believed about, excellence and modeling excellence, in terms of how to be a leader, kind of having someone to look at and say, that is a good example of what I want. But I want people to think of me the way I think about him. So having that sort of in my mind, it just so happened I was lucky enough to pick someone or find someone that was a very good example of leadership, that I could then sort of follow and model and emulate myself, which I think I did well, but, you kind of never know, do you?
Okay. And let's talk a little bit now about your deployment to Afghanistan.
I went there first in 2009, and then I went back in 2011, and then back again in 2013. I remember very distinctly my first patrol. So you spend a long time before you deploy to any kind of high threat area doing what we call PDT, pre-deployment training. So it's kind of like familiarization training, and you get taught a lot about the atmosphere, things to expect that are normal, things to expect or things to look out for that are not normal. It's kind of funny. You don't really know until you've been there. You can do all of the training in the world of what to expect and how it's going to be and what's going on, but until you've sort of been there, you don't really kind of settle into it, strangely. So I remember that first time after having been drilled with, you'll see lots of this and lots of this will happen and this is not normal, and kinds of just pattern of life, what does that look like, in a high threat area. Driving out the gates on first patrol I went on, which was about a week after I got there, I was top gunner, so I'm sat like on gun on the top of a mounted vehicle, and I'm scanning for threats effectively. Now, what I've been taught in PDT is, things like, people stood there looking at you on their phone. That's a potential threat because they could be sort of calling in someone or whatever. So, and I'm looking for anyone on their phone. I'm calling it through. Anything that looks even slightly suspicious, I'm calling it in. So very, very hyper vigilant. But interestingly, not really scared or worried. I don't remember feeling that at all. But I do remember feeling, I've got a really important job to do here, making sure that, not only is the patrol safe, but making sure that I don't miss anything. So I just remember that first patrol being really, really hyper vigilant and super on the lookout for anything that's going on sort of around me, and just thinking, this is my job. I've got to do this.
It's interesting for me because I guess anyone who's not been in the RAF or the MOD or the Marines or anything like that, I find that really fascinating. What keeps you hypervigilant? Like, what keeps you from being fearful? Is it adrenaline? Is it training? Is it all of the above?
That's a really good question, actually. So I think, and this is just the first thing that really comes to mind, when you kind of go out on a patrol like that, you kind of know the guys fairly well, right? And you've done X amount of training with them. So although you're in a different environment, it's not something that you've not done. So we would have been out on patrols in training. We would have done what we're doing. And, now we're just kind of doing it in a different environment and we're doing it for real. So also you are kind of given what you call actions on. So actions on are, if X happens, then we do Y. If X happens, we do Y. And you get given this, you get a massive set of actions on, and you know what they are because you've been through them again and again and again and again, and you've been through them in training. They're drilled into your head. So it's not like you don't know what to do. I think often like fear and things like that come from situations where you don't really know what to do. But at no point did I ever feel like that. Certainly not in the position I was in. Now, a little bit different when you're in a leadership position out there and things happen, right? Because big saying in the military is no plan survives first contact. So you can go out with a plan. You've got it in your mind what you want to do and what's kind of what your intention is for the patrol. But as soon as you come under contact or under fire or anything like that, that all goes out the window. And then you're thinking on your feet, right? So yeah, a little bit different for me at least, anyway, my experience of it was very different, where I just had to scan for threats, make sure there was nothing there, make sure, we're all okay, compared to making the decisions under pressure. Like that's a bit of a different sort of, context.
And tell me a little bit about that. Like what does leadership look like in conflict zones or dangerous situations?
Yeah. So I really like this, and I teach this sometimes on some of my workshops, right? Now, I can't remember exactly where it came from. I believe it came from some major general in the US Army or the US Marines or something like that. But they speak about something called the OODA loop. It stands for observe, orientate, decide, act, right? And it's like a loop, right? So OODA. So you observe what's going on, right? So what is happening around you? What is happening sort of in the environment with your team? Like what are the enemy doing? You know, what's going on, sort of what's happening, you know, that's observe. Orientate is where do I fit in that, right? So where do I fit within what is happening around me? What have I got at my disposal to be able to do whatever I can do about said situation to swing it in my favor? And similarly with the resources that I have around me too, you know, so where do I fit within this situation and what have I got to do something about it? And then decide is quite literally that. It's based on my observations and how I've orientated myself within it. What decision am I going to make? And then act is, again, what it says on the tin. It's about doing whatever it is that you've decided. But then once that's happened, it then goes back again. So you then back in observe and then you go back to orientate. Now, this is what you call the OODA loop, right? OODA, so it's your OODA loop. And the idea of it is everyone's kind of doing that all the time. Whoever runs theirs quicker, whoever can get round theirs quicker will have the advantage in whatever situation they're in. When it comes to operating in high threat environments and high pressure situations and scenarios, your ability to make decisions like quickly, but also like well-informed decisions will always give you the advantage, because if the enemy is reacting to what you're doing, then you're on the front foot, whereas vice versa, obviously you're on the back foot. So a real sort of big thing and an interesting one for me. And again, although I don't teach people in high pressure situations now, or not in high threat situations, sorry, but the same thing still can apply to business, right? And to these kinds of things. So especially if you've got competitors and stuff going on around you and whatever sort of industry you're in, if you can run your OODA loop quicker than your competitors can, then you will always be on the front foot. So that's probably my biggest leadership takeaway from high threat situations is that.
Well, we'll just take a short break and then we'll be right back, and then we'll talk a little bit more about NLP.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Dawn and I'm here with Conrad, and we're just continuing our conversation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about NLP and leadership. So, Conrad, when did you first come across NLP?
First time I ever came across NLP was on my third tour of Afghanistan. In between patrols, we used to have a bit of downtime where there isn't really too much to do on camp. And at the time, I was really interested in Darren Brown and his kind of shows and stuff. I thought he was pretty awesome. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about what he was doing and sort of how he was doing it, looking into the legitimacy of it a little bit, if you will. Amongst my musings, I came across NLP and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. But everything I sort of looked at the time was, you know, this stuff is magic, like this will change your life and blah, blah, and all of these like, you know, wildly flamboyant claims. I just thought it just really intrigued me as to what it is and what it was. So that's kind of how I first came across it. But then when I got back from that tour, and it wasn't until about a year later that I got posted to Rise Norton, interestingly, in Oxfordshire. The section I was working in at the time was attached to the Training Development Centre. So I went in there and I asked if they had anything going about NLP. And they said, no, not specifically, but they do have a course running, which is kind of like NLP in disguise, which just added to the whole intrigue of it. I was like, why is it in disguise? What's this all about? Anyway, I went on that. It was just a 2-day course. And it was for instructors. I was instructing at the time. And I just fell in love with it. I was like, this is incredible. I need to know more about this. And so I then subsequently went and trained as a practitioner. And it kind of went from there.
Amazing. And for someone that like knows zilch about NLP, what is it in like really simple terms?
So it stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. What that kind of means, like an explanation for it, is it's the language of the mind and how it affects your behavior is probably the simple explanation. It can be described as many things. It's described as an attitude, a methodology, that leaves behind a trail of techniques. It can also be described as the objective study of subjective experience. So there's lots of different ways it can be described, but on the whole, what it is is a collection of models, theories, techniques, and things that have been noticed in other people that achieve excellent results in the work that they do, mainly from therapists, psychologists, and places like that. So it's not really one thing. It's a body of knowledge or a body of information which has sort of been patched together from lots of different sources, you know, across the coaching, performance, even some therapeutic space.
And how do you see NLP helping leaders today?
So the big thing about NLP that helps people more than anything, I feel, is it's about understanding yourself, right? One of the common misconceptions about NLP, and one thing that sort of people get wrong a lot with it, is it's all about others. So it's all about, a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, you can understand other people, you know, better, and you can, you know, and you can work with other people better, and blah, 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 blah. Now, you can, but before you do any of that, similarly with coaching, really, it's very much about self. You've got to kind of learn yourself, and you've got to see where your own blind spots are, and you've got to understand yourself on a deeper level. So it's about sort of developing that self-awareness. Now, in how that links into leadership is whereby I used to think, you know, leadership was very much about, you know, leading from the front and being the best and being excellent and whatever and blah, blah, blah. Over the course of my sort of life, what I've come to learn more than anything is that some of the best leaders that I see nowadays are the ones who are, firstly, the most genuine, but more importantly, the ones that are closest to who they actually are, you know, as in closest to themselves and are most okay with who they are. And the people that really sort of some awful leadership, I think, in you know, in the modern world, are the ones who are trying to be something, or that, you know, aren't sort of being who they really are. They're doing, you know, they're being what they want other people to think that they are. How that all links is NLP helps leaders understand themselves on a deeper level, and it helps leaders develop self-awareness, and it helps them to find out where their blind spots are. Very similar to coaching, right? And it helps them, it gives them a framework for, you know, not just understanding themselves on a better level, but also, you know, how to then model good behaviors from others wherever you kind of see it. I suppose you see quite a lot of similar kinds of things in terms of, you know, some of the work that you do in coaching with some leaders and stuff that are just not self-aware enough.
Yeah, and it's that thing of, like you said, just like digging deep into yourself and questioning everything that you do as well. Like, okay, why did I do that? And I know some people might. So some people are a bit skeptical. I know you were a bit skeptical about NLP when you first discovered it as well. And I guess it's those kind of claims in terms of how these things will help us understand ourselves. But there's so many different things out there, isn't there? There's NLP. You have, you know, lots of assessments like DISC assessments. There's a fascinating one that I've come across called Finding Out What Your Saboteurs Are. And it's looking at like past trauma that you've experienced and how that will frame the way that you act and everything like that. And I guess there's different models, isn't there, that resonate for different people in different ways. And like you said, NLP is such a vast study of the, you know, the language of the mind, and there's probably so many different principles within NLP, and some leaders or individuals, whoever they are, that are using it might resonate maybe with other parts of it more than others. And I guess it's finding actually like what works for you, like what makes you go on a deeper level to understand yourself, and what makes you tick, and like what makes you act a certain way.
And you're right, there is so much stuff in it. I always sort of use this frame at the beginning of my courses whereby I often describe it as like a wardrobe, right? So NLP is a bit like a wardrobe, and you kind of open the wardrobe, and within it, there'll be all kinds of different clothes on the rail, and there'll be all kinds of different things within there, you know, for you to try on. You might kind of pick some out, put them on, and have a look in the mirror and think, not really me, doesn't quite fit, right? And you might kind of put it back. But there'll be other things that you kind of put on and you're like, yeah, this is me. That there's, you know, that this is like really kind of resonating with me. And the idea that I try and sort of get people on board with is, although everything might not be to your taste, that you see in the wardrobe, try everything on, because then at least you know. And more importantly, is that wardrobe isn't going anywhere. It's a little bit like Pandora's box, right? Once you've kind of opened it, you can't sort of close it. It's always there. So one of the kind of aspects of the work that I do at the moment, so I do some work for a charity called the Warrior Program. It helps veterans, it helps serving people, and the spouses of both cohorts kind of untie some of the knots that they've got going on in their head, right? One of the things with it is every time I go down to the Warrior Program as a coach, you listen through the content, and I've heard that content now, 30, 40 times. You hear it differently every time, because every time I go down to do some coaching there, I'm at a different point in my life. So the wardrobe that is being taught down there, there are some things on there that I'm like, yeah, this really fits. This is good for me. And other times I'm like, well, maybe not. But then I'll go down the following month and I'm like, actually, do you know what? I didn't like that last month, but actually this really fits me now. So it's very much the same with NLP. At different points and different times in life, different things will fit because we change, right? That's what we do with people. So yeah.
I love that. Like different things are going to work for you at different times. And that's kind of inspiration for this podcast really, is that notion of like things are constantly changing. Things that may work for you once might not work for you today. And you might be the right leader for an organization and this period of time when they're going through rapid change, but then when they go through a buyout or an exit or whatever it may be, you might not be the right leader for that, not necessarily leader. You might not be the right, individual IC for that the company at a time, and that's okay. We change. We're allowed to change and move on and do different things. It's part of the excitement of life. But I guess sometimes it's I guess when chapters end, we can kind of have that grief, can't we? And then we think like, oh, you sort of think, oh, I wish I could still be that way or be that way of thinking or do that job or whatever it might be. But actually like the evolution, the change is a really good thing that we should embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's about, the thing that will differentiate the best leaders from the others will be the ones that can recognize that. And more importantly, then have the humility to do something about it, if you know what I mean. So not just the ones that think, oh, I'm really struggling here, but I don't want anyone to see that I'm struggling. It's it's the ones that, not only recognize that they're struggling, but then also have the humility to, call on others in order to help them through that situation. And it's about developing the ability to do that. NLP can help with that a lot.
So we talked a little bit about how NLP can help people. If someone was curious about like the workshops that you run, what sort of person do you think that your NLP workshops could help, and how might it help them?
So honestly, they are helpful for anyone. Anyone who is, I suppose it's most helpful for people who are in a position or going through some sort of transition of change of some sort, whatever that change might be. So whether that's sort of pre-change, so I don't know, maybe they are soon to promote or soon to, change careers or, even change at home, so maybe they've got, young child on the way, whatever it might be. But, certainly in the lead up to some sort of change. But then interestingly, also on the other side of that change too, people can quite often find it difficult to navigate new changes, especially when they're either not expecting it or they've rushed in head first and then they're like, oh, what do I do here? So anyone who's kind of going through any period of that of any sort, yeah, the workshops are really, really helpful for NLP training too. So my courses are all very targeted towards a personal development standpoint, personal development view. There's lots of sort of coaching threads throughout the courses. You'll find some out there that are lean towards business and whatever else, but ultimately they're all teaching the same thing. Mine are probably more leaning towards, personal development than anything else. So, yeah. And that I find tends to sit most in the change sort of bracket. So anyone who's going through any sort of change of some sort.
Well, I feel like we could talk for a long time, but I'd love to move into kind of a couple of reflection points as we get to the end of the show. So You were awarded the Royal Victorian Medal. Tell me a bit about that and what that meant to you.
So from my younger years at the Queen's Colour Squadron, so I did 7 years there doing ceremonial duties and the like. For the last tour of my career, for the last 5 years, I worked in a small section called the Drill and Ceremonial Office. So what we did there was we weren't part of the Queen's Colour Squadron. We were essentially the lead drill and ceremonial instructors for the Royal Air Force in general. So the majority of state and ceremonial jobs that happen on a rolling basis would be covered by the squadron. But there's only 120, 150 people on the squadron. Some parades require far more people than that. And for those particular parades, they would draft in people from across the Air Force, right? So whenever there's something large which happens, like a large scale parade that requires lots and lots of people, we would often hold the training commitment for that. So a couple of things that we held the training commitment for were Jubilee parades. So we did the training for all of the blue suits you saw on parade for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, which was a huge success. We also held the training commitment for if one of the royal family dies overseas, and the sort of parade repatriation sort of thing for that. Now, when Prince Philip died, it was during COVID, and he wasn't overseas. So it was only a kind of small affair which happened. Well, I say small affair. So on, by our standards, it was huge, but on a royal sort of scale, it was quite small. Bearing in mind it was scaled for, hundreds, because it was during COVID. I think only about 40 or 50 from each service went to do the funeral. But we trained those guys, over the weekend, and sent them off to do the parade the following week. And yeah, again, it was a raging success. But then not so long after that, it's almost just over a year, the Queen died, for which we also held the commitment for. And that was quite a large undertaking. So that wasn't during COVID. Everything was sort of, back up and running again. So I think there was circa 450, Air Force troops. So when I say we, there's 4 people in our section. 2 people who sit up the top, work more on the sort of strategy policy sort of side, who are doing bits and bobs within looking at the overarching thing. And then there's me and one other guy who actually kind of put the training program together, gathered the team of drill instructors who we had previously taught, the team of drill instructors who then disseminated the training to 450 people. And that was such an interesting project to work on. I mean, not only could there not be a higher honor, as a military sort of person, it was watched by, 4.1 billion people, almost half the planet of were watching this funeral. And every sort of Air Force person you saw on parade that day was the result of the training program that we put together. And I was very kindly awarded the Royal Victorian Medal from Charles for my work on both his mum and his dad's funeral. Yeah, that was, and interesting is when I kind of got that after I left. As a matter of fact, it was actually the last job I did. I left later on that year, and it wasn't until the following year, so I was 6 months into being a civvy, where I got the phone call to say, you've been awarded such and such. And I was like, oh, wow, awesome. It's really nice. Thanks very much. So yeah, when I went to go and collect the medal at Buckingham Palace, everyone who was there to collect theirs were all in uniform except for me. I was just in a suit, right? And as Charles comes round, he says, "Oh, have you left already?" And I said, "Yeah, I left a little while ago." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry it took so long to get this to you." And I was like, God. I'm like, your mum's just died. You've just taken over, as sovereign of the country. You don't need to apologise to me for getting a medal to me, which you kindly awarded me anyway, But yeah, really humble sort of, moment, and really nice way to end my career, if you will, in the military.
Yeah, amazing way to close a chapter.
Yeah, it really was. Certainly totally unexpected, but very, very well received.
Well, congrats. And another reflection question for you. So if you could give yourself one piece of advice about effective leadership, firstly, what would that advice be? And secondly, what age would you give yourself that advice?
It's got to be be true to yourself, be who you are, because I think who you are is always going to be 1,000 times better, and 1,000 times more interesting and able to make decisions better, and will be more or better received than any fabricated mask or persona that you feel you can put on. A really nice sort of way to figure that out is, if you feel you have to put a mask on in a certain area in order to be accepted, then, is that the right place for you? So I think when it comes to leadership, be yourself. There's no need to be anyone else. Only you can be you. So do it. And what age did I need to hear that? I don't know. I'd like to say from when I was about 13, but I don't think I would have received it at 13, if you know what I mean. I think maybe when I was about 15, I think it might have gone in a little bit more. So it's certainly around teenage sort of years when you're in your socialization period or your modeling period where, you're finding your place in the world and who you are sort of within it. I was certainly sort of looking for mine and who I was. What about you?
I was going to say, that's great advice. I feel like I need to tell myself that every 6 months. And also to the point of what you said earlier of, we're always changing as well. Be yourself, having that acceptance or embracing that that's going to change frequently. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because what I often see, and I don't do many individual like one-to-one coaching sort of clients. I do have some, but I don't have too many. But what I often see, certainly when it comes to sort of people in high pressure leadership positions, is, and I explain this to them, and they're like, "Oh my god, it's like a big revelation." But you have, your self-image, right? This is who you think you are, right? Who you are, your own sort of whatever you think of yourself. And then you have above that, you have your ideal self. So that's who you want to be, right? But then the more stretched they are, the more further apart they are, or the further apart they are, the more it stretches your self-esteem. So if you've got a really sort of low image of who you actually are, but then who you want to be is like, miles high, then your self-esteem is going to be diminished, right? It'll be really stretched. But the closer together they are, then the more emboldened and the more solid your self-esteem is, right? And that's a huge sort of, help for working in high pressure environments. I always do a little exercise with, right, who do you think you are? What's going on? What is your current self-image? And then, it's right, well, who do you want to be? Like, who would you like to be? What's the ideal version of you? And, and then we kind of compare and contrast and see where the gaps are. And, that's often a big determinant of self-esteem. But yeah, when it comes to leadership, definitely just about being you. You can drop the who you want to be and whatever else. It's just what's really you.
That's so interesting, isn't it? And I guess there's like a balance to be struck there for each individual. And this might change at different periods of time in life as well, depending on what you have going on in your life. Who are you now versus like the ideal self? Like, how ambitious, I guess, do you want to be in terms of like, how far apart are they? Maybe they can be quite far apart at times when you have that like capacity to maybe change something or do something different. But if you've got, other things happening in your life, like having children, aging parents, illness, like all the things that are happening at the time, like how much capacity are you going to have to then kind of dedicate that? Maybe it's okay to just be like, okay, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, and these are like, kind of little steps I'm going to make. This was a therapy principle actually from some therapy I had, but one thing I was asked to do was just write down all of my achievements throughout my life, and I thought, oh, I'm going to sit there and be like, oh, I don't know like what to write, and I wrote like 2 pages. And sometimes I still dig that out now when I'm feeling a bit low. I'll dig that out and I'll go, I'll run through that list of achievements. Because I think when you are, maybe when you're feeling like you want to do something or you're striving to do something or be your ideal self and you feel really far away from that, if you kind of go back and actually like reflect on how far you've come, that can be really, really good. Nice self-esteem booster. Well, thank you so much, Conrad. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad that we met at the In Focus event and then we got to speak today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great chatting with you, and thank you for having me along.
Thank you to everyone that's listened today. We will share some show notes along with this podcast as well. So Conrad will include things like your contact details, a little bit of information about your workshops, and everything like that. But yeah, is there anything like one little takeaway of like a little nugget of NLP that you want to like end on for the audience?
So this is from a set of kind of things that we ask people to assume in NLP, right? And they're called presuppositions. There's nothing to say that they're objectively true, but there is definitely something in, if you assume them, you are more likely to get better results. And I like this one because it's often the one that I get most pushback from. So it's people are always doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. A lot of people, it's not difficult to look around the world now and think there is no way that they are doing the best that they can with the resources they have. However, this is again a big sort of thing with NLP. Apply that to self, right? And think about a past self and think about a time in the past when you made a decision that you can sit here now and think, oh, that was an awful decision. Why on earth did you do that? Now, you will be able to look back at who you were at that time and say, well, that's why I made that decision, right? And so based on that, you can kind of deduce that we don't inherently make bad decisions. We don't make a decision because we think it's a bad idea. There's always some positive intent behind it, whatever it might be. And that doesn't necessarily mean positive for others, it just means positive for self. I think if everyone, and it certainly when you're in a position of leadership, right? If you can sort of go through your, do your job with the mindset of everyone is doing the best that they can with the resources that they have, you will instantly find you are in a much better position for emotionally intelligent leadership because you can talk to people on a deeper level, understand a little bit more about what's going on. But similarly, it just helps you not have to look at the world and think, oh my God, everyone is batshit crazy, right? They're just doing the best that they can, right? And so it allows you to have a little bit of compassion for others. But similarly, you can apply that same thing to self. So even when you make bad decisions that you don't think about at the time, that you later come to learn actually are bad decisions, you can have a bit of self-compassion and say, do you know what? I was doing the best that I could. I know better now, but I didn't at the time. And I think that's something which we can all take something from, is having a little bit of self-compassion.
Compassion, context, positive intent, assume positive intent.
Exactly that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for ending on that. If you're keen to continue the conversation with myself and Conrad, do head over to LinkedIn. We'll be posting some key themes from today. And yeah, let us know how you got on with that activity as well. If you kind of applied it, it'd be really great to hear. And if you would like to get in contact with Conrad, the details are going to be in the show notes. And if you liked this episode, please do share it with someone who you think might be ready to grow into their next season, or maybe interested about NLP. But yes, take care for now and hope to see you next time on Seasons of Leadership. Cheers all. Bye.